Namo Buddhaya, Namo Amitabha. Hello everyone. So in today's video, I feel like talking about, enlightened beings think that they're enlightened. So there are some teachers or gurus in this world that self-claim that they're enlightened. Right? How do we know if they're real or not? So before we discuss this question, let's first look at enlightened beings know that they're enlightened. Yes, they know. They're not stupid. They're enlightened. They're clearly aware of their state of mind. If someone says, how do I know if I'm enlightened? If you have this kind of question, you don't even understand your state of mind. You're not enlightened. But what enlightened beings think that they're enlightened. How are these two different? To clearly know, to clearly aware, is different from one needs to generate a thought and to identify with it. It's like a clear mirror that clearly knows and reflects everything. Whatever that's in front of the mirror clearly knows. But the mirror will not think or judge or label or identify or to be attached to, you're beautiful, you're ugly, you're tall, you're short. So this is different. To clearly aware one state of mind is different from to generate the thought and think that I am enlightened. Whoever thinks that I am enlightened, even they generate this thought, they generate this identification, they generate this attachment. They say, everybody, I'm an enlightened guru, follow me. This is not enlightenment. Why? This is like a serious attachment to the notion of the self, and they still have the attachment to the self. That the self thinks that the self realized enlightenment. The first stage of enlightenment, Sotapanna, which is equivalent to the first stage of faith in Mahayana Buddhism. What does the Sotapanna get rid of? The attachment to the self. One already has no self. One already do not have any slightest attachment to the notion of the self. So one do not think that, I'm enlightened. Next time, if you meet maybe a spiritual teacher or guru that self-claims that they are enlightened, I ask them, who is this self thinks that who attains enlightenment? The first level of enlightenment is no self. The Buddha talks about this really clearly in the Diamond Sutra. That's why we need to study the sutras. If we don't study the sutras and we don't really have the wisdom to distinguish who is the real teacher or not. So in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha asked Subhuti. Subhuti is a senior disciple of the Buddha who attained Arahant. Subhuti, what do you think? Would it be right for Sotapanna to think like this? I have attained the fruit of Sotapanna. Subhuti said, no, world owner one. Subhuti, what do you think? Would it be right for Sakadagami to think like this? I have attained the fruit of Sakadagami. Subhuti said, no, world owner one. Subhuti, what do you think? Would it be right for an Anagami to think like this? I have attained the fruit of Anagami. Subhuti said, no, world owner one. Subhuti, what do you think? Would it be right for an Arhat to think like this? I have attained the path of an Arhat. Subhuti said, no, world owner one. If an Arhat were to think I have attained the path of an Arhat, then he would be clinging to self, others, sentient beings, and lifespan. World owner one, the Buddha has said that I have attained non-contentious samadhi, and that among all people I am the foremost in this, and that amongst all arhats I am also the foremost at going beyond desire, and yet I do not have the thought that I am a passionless arhat. Well, owner one, if I were to have the thought that I had attained the path of an arhat, then the world owner one would not have said that Subhuti takes delight in the practice of tranquility. So as we can see, for all these four levels of enlightenment, one already have no notion of the self. One would not think that they have attained the fruit of an arahant or arhat. If they think so, they're attached to the notion of the self, right? Attached to the notion of the sentient beings. Right? Enlightenment is no attachment, no separation. So one would not think like that. Right? Even for a bodhisattva, one would not think that one is a bodhisattva. And why is this? If a bodhisattva has a notion of self, notion of others, notion of sentient beings, or notion of lifespan, then he's not a bodhisattva. Even the Buddha does not think that he is a Buddha. Even when the Buddha used the word I, and there is no such attachment to the self. He's not really talking about the self. Subhuti, when the Tathagata speaks of a self, is the same as no self, and yet all ordinary people take it as a self. And even when the Buddha said he has realized Buddhahood, and there is no such attachment, and no attachment to the so-called Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi. The Buddha simply used these words as ways of convenience to describe the indescribable. Subhuti said to the Buddha, World Honor One, the Buddha attained Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi, yet nothing was attained. So it is, so it is. There is not even the slightest dharma that can be obtained in Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi, and this is what is called Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi. In the Heart Sutra, it says, because there is nothing to be obtained, the bodhisattvas, relying on prajna paramita, one has realized Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi. So nothing to be obtained, nothing to be attached. Like prajna paramita, the transcendent wisdom. What's this transcendent wisdom? No attachment, no separation, including no attachment to the state of enlightenment, to the so-called Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi. All these are just names used by the Buddha to really describe the indescribable, and this state is also not to be attached. But to say nothing to be obtained, it doesn't mean that one speaks of annihilation. Subhuti, suppose you had this thought, those who initiate the mind of Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi advocate the Dharma of annihilation. Do not have this thought. And why is this? Those who initiate the mind of Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi in regards to the Dharma do not advocate the notion of annihilation. Some people say, oh, nothing to be obtained, and there's nothing we need to do. We don't need to cultivate, we don't need to nianfo. So this state indeed exists, but one does not attain anything from the external. One simply get rid of all the delusional views, perceptions, attachment, and separation. One simply perceive things as they are without attachment and separation. And that is Tathagata. That is Anuttaya Sanya Sambodhi. So the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas help save sentient beings without attachment to the notion of the self, without attachment to the notion of the sentient beings. Someone said it can be quite egoistic even for the Bodhisattvas to think that he can be the world's savior, to save all sentient beings. But they speak like this without such attachment, without even the slightest attachment. In the end, there is no sentient beings to be saved. No such attachment, because from the eyes of the Buddha, from the eyes of the enlightened beings, they see the Buddha nature in all beings, the oneness in all. That's why they will never get upset by us, no matter how evil we sentient beings can be, because they don't attach to the phenomena, but they see the true essence of who we are. They see the Buddha nature in all beings. For someone who obtains nianfo samadhi through Amitabha chanting, then whoever one sees, everything becomes Amitofo. That is nianfo samadhi. For the state of mind of the enlightened, whatever they see is the Buddha nature. They see the ultimate potential in who we all are. So if anyone in this world, they self-claim that they are enlightened, they had maybe some mystical experiences through their meditation, they think that's samadhi, all these are misunderstandings. The Buddha talked about it really clearly in the Sutra, the 50 skandha demonic states described at the end of the Sutra. For each of the 5 skandhas, the forms, feelings, thinking, formation or mental activities, and consciousness. Each of the 5 skandhas has 10 demonic states. And a lot of people, they do not really understand what enlightenment actually means. And they think when they experience some kind of mystical experiences, and that's enlightenment, that's samadhi. The Buddha said, all this are just mere misunderstandings. Mystical experiences are just mystical experiences. Even for one to have spiritual power, it doesn't mean that one is enlightened. If one self-claims that they're enlightened, this is attachment to the notion of the self. They still have this I, thinks that I am enlightened. You are not enlightened. They have attachment to the self, attachment to the notion of others. This is not enlightenment. They have the slightest attachment, slightest thought that think that they are enlightened. This is not enlightenment. Or worse, if they self-claim that they are the future Buddha or Maitreya or whatever bodhisattvas that come here to help save the world. If they self-claim that, this is false. Do not believe them. In the sutra, the Buddha clearly states of the time when Maitreya bodhisattva will come down to be a Buddha. 4,000 heavenly years in two-seater heaven. One heavenly day equals to 400 human years. So we still have to wait for a tremendously long time for Maitreya Buddha to come down. This period is called the auspicious kappa. Kappa is a time period that described the formation of the world from the beginning to the end. The 4 stages are formation, existence, destruction, and emptiness. During this kappa we are currently in now is called auspicious kappa. During this kappa, there will be 1,000 Buddhas that come to the Saha world. And Shakyamuni Buddha is the 4th Buddha. Maitreya will be the 5th. And Maitreya Buddha will not come down until a very, very long time. This has already been said clearly in the sutra. So anyone that claim in between this period and say that they are the Maitreya Buddha, do not believe them. This is they don't even have the basic knowledge of Buddhism. They don't even understand Buddhism 101. Yes, in the Dharma ending age, there will be lots of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that come to our world to help, like the Buddha told us in the Sutra, but none of them will reveal their identities. They will definitely not self-claim. They will not self-claim that they are Amitabha or Guan Yin or Shakyamuni Buddha. None of this. But at the end of their life, they may reveal their identity just to give faith to the beings here. But they will only do so at the end of their time when they finish their mission here. So while they're here establishing enlightened activities, they will not reveal their identities. So do not believe if anybody they self-claim, they say they are sentient Buddha, or they say they are enlightened. I do not believe any of this. I stay away from them. Or they advocate lust. I advocate you to indulge in desire. All these are not the real teachers. Because if one have the slightest attachment in the Saha world, one cannot exit the cycle of samsara. Because craving is the root of suffering. They tell you to increase your craving. They self-claim that they're enlightened beings. They want you to follow them, to worship them. They do whatever their spiritual work for money and fame. I do not believe in any of these teachers. That's why we need to study the sutras, the teachings by the Buddha. The sutra is the Dharma body of the Buddha. If we study the sutras, we will be able to have the wisdom to distinguish who is the real teacher or not. So we can follow the right teachings and the right teachings by the Buddha, and will not go into the wrong practices and follow the wrong teachers. So I hope this helps. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Amitabha.